There is a phrase people use when they want to describe somewhere broken, somewhere that has failed its people. They call it a third world country. They picture crumbling infrastructure, empty shelves, people sleeping on dirt floors, children who go hungry. They picture somewhere far away. They picture somewhere else. But here is what the data says right now, in the wealthiest nation on earth. In 2024, over 771,000 Americans lacked stable housing on a single given night, a record high, an 18% increase year over year. 43.7 million people lived in poverty, including 9.7 million children. The number of children facing simultaneous water and food insecurity more than doubled between 2005 and 2020. And working-class Americans are now dying, on average, years earlier than the wealthy, not because of genetics, not because of choices, but because of their zip code and their paycheck. This is not a story about other countries. This is a story about America. And once you see the full picture, the phrase third world conditions stops sounding like an exaggeration. It starts sounding like a diagnosis. Let's start with what the government counts, because even that is alarming enough. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, under the Supplemental Poverty Measure, which accounts for taxes, work expenses, housing costs, and non-cash benefits more accurately than the official count, the poverty rate in 2024 was 12.9%. That is nearly 44 million Americans. But that number is just the beginning, because the way America officially defines poverty is outdated in ways that make the real picture look much better than it actually is. The federal poverty threshold in 2024 was set at around $16,320 for a single adult. In contrast, MIT's living wage calculator now estimates that a single adult in a city like Los Angeles needs roughly $46,000 per year just to cover rent, food, and basic transportation, nearly 3 times the poverty line. That mismatch means there are tens of millions of Americans who are technically counted as not poor by official metrics, while actually unable to afford basic stability. They are invisible in the headline numbers. They are very visible at food banks, emergency rooms, and payday loan offices. Of the 44 million people living in poverty in 2024, 33% of them, approximately 14 million, live in what is classified as deep poverty, meaning their income is less than half the already low official poverty threshold. Another 51 million Americans live just above that line, between 100 and 149% of the poverty threshold. These are people one job loss, one illness, or one car breakdown away from falling through entirely. And poverty in America does not fall evenly. It is carved along lines of race, geography, and history. While poverty rates for Black, Hispanic, and American Indian and Native Alaskan Americans have improved over the past decade, their rates remain well above the national average. The zip code a person is born into still determines more about their future than almost any choice they will ever make. When we hear homelessness, most people imagine a specific image. A person they've walked past. A figure on a bench. What they don't imagine is the full scale of it. In 2024, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development recorded 771,480 people experiencing homelessness, the highest number ever recorded in modern tracking history. But the breakdown of that number is where things get even harder to sit with. A significant portion of those people were not on the street because they stopped working or gave up. They had jobs. They had incomes. And it still wasn't enough. Around 256,000 people, roughly 40% of all homeless Americans in 2023, were classified as unsheltered, meaning their primary nighttime location was outside, in a car, a tent, or some other place not meant for human habitation. In California, one of the wealthiest states in the wealthiest country on earth, the numbers tell a story that doesn't match the prosperity narrative. The number of people living in vehicles on San Francisco streets rose from 474 in July 2024 to 612 in June 2025. These are not people who chose this. These are people who ran out of options. One 58-year-old man watched a flatbed tow truck haul away his van, the vehicle he had lived in for over 2 decades, during a city sweep in San Jose. He had no idea where he would go next. As of May 2025, over 200 anti-homeless, anti-survival ordinances have been introduced nationwide, the majority of which are camping bans. Cities are not solving homelessness. They are moving it, sweeping it, criminalizing it, while the underlying conditions that produce it go untouched. In Phoenix, more than 1,000 people living in the city's largest encampment were displaced by court order. In Minneapolis, police enforcement actively blocked new encampments from forming. In San Francisco, police and street cleaners took a heavy-handed approach to clearing tents. The encampments decline in the count. The people do not disappear. They just become harder to see. Let's talk about food, because food insecurity in the United States has reached levels that would be recognizable in countries we routinely describe as impoverished. In 2024, 13.7% of American households, that is 18.3 million households, were food insecure at some point during the year. This means they were uncertain of having, or unable to acquire, enough food to meet the needs of all their members because they had insufficient money or other resources. That number has remained essentially flat compared to 2023, showing no meaningful improvement despite the economic growth happening at the top of the income distribution. But look deeper and the numbers become even harder to process. Within that group, millions of households experienced what federal researchers classify as very low food security, meaning the normal eating patterns of one or more household members were actually disrupted. These are families where someone went without meals, not because the food wasn't available in America, because they couldn't afford to access it. And this is not happening in isolation. Research published in a major peer-reviewed scientific journal found that between 2005 and 2020, the number of children in the United States facing simultaneous water and food insecurity more than doubled. Black children were 3.5 times more likely than white children to experience both at the same time. Hispanic children were 7.1 times more likely. When children in a country cannot reliably access clean water or adequate food, the language of third world conditions is not inflammatory. It is accurate. Water insecurity is something most Americans associate with countries in sub-Saharan Africa or South Asia. It is not something most people think about when they think about the United States. But the reality is more complicated than that assumption suggests. Water security in the United States is far from universal and is increasingly under threat. Water insecurity, defined as insufficient quantity or quality of water to support health, livelihoods, and basic needs, remains a serious and documented problem across parts of the country. One study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that between 2013 and 2017, approximately 1.1 million people in the United States had insecure water access. Almost half of those people lived in the 50 largest metropolitan areas of the country, including 65,000 people in New York City alone who did not have access to piped water. The same research found that households without running water were more likely to include people of color and more likely to spend a disproportionate share of their income on housing. Flint, Michigan became a national story, but it was not an isolated incident. It was a warning about aging infrastructure, about the communities that fall through the cracks of a system that cannot or will not maintain the basics. The pipes in many American cities and rural regions are old, failing, and disproportionately located in low-income communities where the political will to fix them has historically been weak. When a family cannot trust the water coming from their tap, when they are buying bottled water to survive in a country with some of the most advanced water treatment technology on the planet, that is a condition most of the world would not hesitate to call what it is. This next part is perhaps the most brutal fact in this entire script, and it is supported by multiple independent research institutions. In 2023, life expectancy in the United States was 78.4 years, more than 4 years lower than the 82.5-year average among comparable wealthy nations. 4 years of life. Measurable, documented, preventable, gone. But that national average conceals something even more disturbing. Using 1.4 billion tax records, researchers found a 14.6-year gap in life expectancy between men in the top 1% of the income distribution and men in the bottom 1%. Among women, the gap is 10.1 years. A man born into poverty in America can expect to die nearly 15 years earlier than a man born into extreme wealth, not because of lifestyle choices alone, but because poverty itself is lethal. It creates chronic stress that damages the body over time. It limits access to preventive care. It places people in environments with more pollution, more violence, less safe food, and less political protection. A U.S. Senate report released in March 2025 found that working-class Americans can expect to die at least 7 years earlier than the wealthy. Among rural counties, a $10,000 increase in median annual household income is associated with an additional 2.6 years of life expectancy. That is not a metaphor. Money literally buys years of life in America. A study from Brown University published in 2025 found that individuals in continental Europe die at rates approximately 40% lower than Americans. The researchers also identified what they called a survivor effect in the United States, where poorer Americans with worse health outcomes die earlier, leaving behind a surviving population that appears wealthier and healthier. This creates the illusion that inequality narrows with age, when in reality it is partly because the poorest Americans simply die sooner. The United States is the only high-income nation where 1% of deaths occur before age 20 and 10% of deaths occur before age 60. Let that sink in. No other wealthy country loses its people this young, at these rates. And the losses are not distributed evenly. They fall hardest on the poor, on people of color, on rural communities, on the people who have the least political power to demand change. Here is where the story gets difficult in a different way. Because this is not a story of a poor country failing to provide for its people. This is a story of a rich country that has chosen, through decades of policy and priority, who gets to benefit from that richness. In America today, the 3 wealthiest individuals own more wealth than the bottom 50%, over 170 million people. Meanwhile, over 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Half of all household income goes to the top 10% of earners. Only 13% of household income reaches the bottom 50% of earners. And just 2% of all household wealth is held by the bottom half of the entire country. This is not natural. It is not inevitable. It is the result of a system that has consistently made choices about where money flows, through tax policy, labor law, housing regulation, healthcare structure, and education funding. And those choices have compounded over decades into the conditions we are documenting right now. The economy is producing enormous wealth. GDP grows. Corporate profits reach record highs. Stock markets set new peaks. And simultaneously, 44 million people are in poverty. 771,000 people slept without stable housing last year. 18 million households couldn't reliably feed themselves. Children in major American cities cannot trust their drinking water. These two realities exist in the same country. At the same time. That is not a coincidence. That is a system operating exactly as it has been structured to operate. One of the most important things to understand about poverty in America is that it is not evenly spread. It concentrates. It clusters. It becomes its own kind of trap. A 2024 study published in The Lancet, analyzing life expectancy across America, found that disparities between groups based on geography, race, income, and urbanization produce gaps in life expectancy as high as 20 years between the most and least advantaged Americans. 20 years. That is the difference between a full life and dying in middle age. And it is determined substantially by where you are born and the color of your skin. Rural America has been particularly abandoned. Hospitals have closed. Grocery stores have closed. Broadband access remains limited. Public transportation is nearly non-existent. Young people leave, taking the economic energy with them. What remains is an aging population with diminishing services, fewer jobs, and deeper despair. The same Senate report noted that among rural counties, a $10,000 increase in median household income is associated with 2.6 additional years of life expectancy. That correlation tells you everything about what it actually means to live in a low-income rural community in 21st century America. It means dying sooner. It means fewer options. It means watching your community shrink around you while the national conversation largely ignores you. Urban poverty presents a different face but equally devastating consequences. Cities like New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston contain enormous concentrations of wealth and equally enormous concentrations of deprivation, often within miles of each other. New York, Los Angeles, and Houston lead all U.S. cities in absolute poverty counts according to Census Bureau data. The gleaming skylines do not contradict the tent encampments beneath them. They coexist. And that coexistence is the point.